That's
true.
Terrible.
True story.
That's terrible. But something that's not terrible is our main topic, Rob.
Yes, of course, tonight we're doing the Seeds of Doom as voted for by you, dear listener. We had a poll which had the Seeds of Doom, Invasion of the Dinosaurs, Mummy on the Orient Express, and Vincent and the Doctor. Seeds of Doom won that poll with 34.5%. Invasion of the Dinosaurs was second on 29.5%, then Mummy on 20.9%, and Vincent and the Doctor brought up the rear on 15.1%. So it's Seeds of Doom tonight, Dave.
It is, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. We like to kick these off with our memories of classic episodes. What are your memories going into the Seeds of Doom?
So I definitely saw this go out on the ABC as a repeat sometime, I want to say, in the late 80s. Mm-hmm. It wasn't part of that 86 run because that finished with Terror of the Zygons, but it did come on, I think, a year or two later. It wasn't a story we had all of on video. I think, as I've told many times, we had episodes depending on what shifts Dad was doing at the time. So I think for this one we had sort of episode 1, 5 and 6 or something like that.
Right.
So I didn't know the whole middle of the story until it came out on VHS some years later. It's a story I didn't watch a lot as a kid. I actively disliked it as a kid. So I have grown up with it over time. Interestingly, it's a story that was late to VHS, late to DVD, and is not yet on Blu-ray. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's my memory. I definitely saw it as a youngster, aged probably about 10, on the ABC as a repeat. Didn't like it. That was my first memory.
This is really interesting because I've jotted down that it didn't gel with me as a young'un either.
Yeah, wow, okay.
It wasn't over my head per se.
Hey, there's not a lot to get.
But it wasn't in my wheelhouse.
Yes, I think that's a better way of putting it, yes.
I think that's because there's a lot of conversation in it and it's drawn out across 6 episodes. There's no space or lasers. It's just running around a country house with some bloody plants. It's one of those stories at first I didn't have much interest in watching. Maybe didn't even stick with it properly the first time it was on TV, and maybe when we tried to watch it at the club I wasn't that interested in it. It's really hard to remember specifically, but that kind of vibe is in absolutely the right direction. But over time, I came to really like it for a lot of different reasons, which I'm sure we'll tease out over the next half hour or 40 minutes. And that's my opening gambit. Yeah,
so to move on to my memory of it, to my opening thought, I have long said, because I'm one of those people that, if you ask me for my favourite of a Doctor era, I'll tell you. You ask me for my least favourite, I'll also tell you. So I like to be absolute like that. I'm that kind of person. And if you said to me, name your favourite Tom Baker story, for some years now, I would have said The Seeds of Doom. Of course, it's very close. There are lots of other ones that are very, very good as well. But I've always just had The Seeds of Doom up there as an adult. And I think that this is peak Doctor Who under Tom Baker. It is the peak of Tom Baker, I think, before you start to see a very slow but obvious decline in the way that he performs the role of the Doctor. He's now been there for 2 full seasons and he's at his absolute strength before he starts to get a bit too big, and, well, we all know where Tom Baker goes. Yeah. I think it is the peak of Robert Holmes as the script editor. It is the peak of Philip Hinchcliffe as the producer. It is the peak of Liz Sladen, only a couple of stories before she leaves. All of these great, great aspects of Doctor Who are all peaking at this point in this story. And then there's a whole lot of other things that go into it. And I will also say, I think that this is a story that's easy to pick as your favourite of an era because it does stand out. It's not an example of typical Tom Baker Doctor Who done very, very well. It is an example of atypical Doctor Who done very, very well. So it does stand out in the way that something like The Caves of Androzani stands out in the Davison era. It is one of those sort of ones. Now, I have thoughts on why and how it stands out, but again, that's my opening before we go in a bit further.
My opening thought on it is I want to mention how good it looks. I mean, I concur with everything you've just said. But from the start, there's a lot to like. The Antarctic base looks really good. The helicopter landing looks surprisingly good and not at all like it's something out of Thunderbirds. The outdoor stuff is great. They seem to have covered a quarry in fake snow, and when the guys from the other base are rescuing Sarah and the Doctor after that explosion, it looks really good. And then later in the stories, all the stuff shot around the manor house, it always looks fab in Doctor Who, doesn't it? So I don't think we can understate that the story just looks good. Not from a modern, oh, I can see all the money on the screen angle, but just a simple, hey, this looks really good for 70s Doctor Who. So throw that on top of everything you just said about it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, this is a time when the budget was probably at its peak in classic Doctor Who, because they were getting all those colour licenses, that they'd hoarded all that money that Barry Letts had hoarded during the Pertwee years, and now Hinchcliffe had it, and inflation wasn't yet kicking in. No. So we weren't sort of starting to get that decline in the power of the budget. So it is probably the most expensive season of Doctor Who in sort of real monetary, on the ground terms that we got. It's directed by Douglas Camfield. Let's not forget about that.
Yeah.
The music is by Jeffrey Bergen. We'll be talking about that. But I agree. I think it just looks spectacular. I think the model work is fantastic, particularly in Antarctica. I think that the Crinoid pod is brilliantly done. I think the Crinoid on the house at the end, those one or two model shots, is very, very good. The intermediate Crinoid, the 12-foot high Crinoid rather than the 30-foot high Crinoid or the 6-foot high Crinoid, that's the weaker part.
The Axon spray painted green.
Oh, I don't mind the Axon spray painted green. It's the next stage.
The next stage. Okay.
The blob Crinoid that's probably the weakest one of the Crinoids. But yeah, look, I think it looks really, really good. Antarctica is done as well as you can on a Doctor Who budget. The snow mostly looks good. There's a couple of moments, I think, like when Tommy's digging the second pod out, where it's very obvious he's just digging through a pile of broken up polystyrene, and occasionally people do get it in their hair. But again, these weren't designed to watch on an 85-inch television on DVD, so you forgive it. But I mean, yeah, I think it looks great, as you said. The model work's great. Antarctica's great. The filming around London is great. It does look like expensive Doctor Who by classic era standards.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Where do you want to go now? I've got comments on everything.
Look, let's keep going on why it didn't work for us as kids, because I think that's an important thing to tease out. And I'm going to say that apart from it being all the things you said, it's a cerebral sort of story. It's a lot of standing around talking urgently. Now, when you're an adult, that standing around talking urgently is brilliant and dramatic and witty and clever, and I just revel in it. As a kid, I don't think you quite get that, but I will also say it is, if not the most upsetting story that I watched as a kid, it is certainly up there as a contender. And I've often said, and I've said this over many years, the thing about violence and death in Doctor Who is that if it's quick and fake, it's okay. So, laser gun, bang, you're dead, fall down, we move on. Who cares? It's television, you get that. But when somebody is suffering, when death is coming, and the individual is trying to cope with the knowledge that death is coming, and they're suffering, and you linger on it, that is disturbing and that is upsetting. So something like Oscar Botcherby being stabbed and slowly bleeding out on a restaurant floor, as he cries and his girlfriend cries, or his friend cries, whatever, like that is upsetting to a child. And the threat of being taken over by a Crinoid is genuinely scary. But the scenes with Keela are one of the only, if not the only times as a kid watching Classic Who where I've had to just go, nah, I'm out. I'm not watching this anymore. This is too horrific. The idea of somebody begging to be let go and suffering and being transformed is horrific as an adult, and as a kid it was too much. So this was a very upsetting story for 10-year-old me.
Yeah. I mean, there's no shying away from the fact this story has quite a body count. It's some pretty horrific stuff. The one that always sticks with me is the unit sergeant who's tossed into the mulcher. And you think, nah, they're not going to do that to a unit bloke. And they do. I think it does happen off camera, but it still happens. And I guess that ratchets up the tension a little when the Doctor and Sarah are in there later. We've seen one person mulched. It's possible. I guess we still know deep down our heroes won't be, but it still feels awful to have them in a situation where we've already seen it end badly for someone else. Yeah, that's the bit that stuck with me in terms of the violence. But gosh, there's violence all the way through.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example. And don't forget, for 5 minutes, they did consider making that Sergeant Benton.
Is that right?
Apparently, yes.
Wow.
So just imagine that. But I'm reminded that Hinchcliffe did cut part of that Keeler scene, because when the butler brings in the plate of raw meat, which is disgusting, apparently, after saying, no, I'm not going to do it, he then gives in to the Crinoid and starts eating the raw meat. But even Hinchcliffe was able to, you know what, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to go that far.
Interesting. And when we talked about Ark in Space, I think we talked about a scene that Hinchcliffe nixed
Yes.
before it went all the way through, yeah.
Yes, Hinchcliffe does talk about 3 occasions when he had to make a cut. I think they're 2 of them, and the other one's probably when he had to recut the cliffhanger of The Deadly Assassin.
Yeah. I did speak earlier about how the show didn't connect with me when I was young, so now that you brought it up, when I was watching this again, I was struck by the way it starts with a lot of talking and a lot of story before we even see the Doctor. You know, and he's not even doing anything dynamic. He's not landing at the base and wondering what's going on and investigating. He's just sitting in someone's office playing with a yo-yo and doing more talking. It's a story that really takes its time, and that's good as it fills out the 6 parts without feeling overly padded, because one of my big bugbears over many 6-part stories is you can see the padding and you think, how good would this have been as like a 4-parter? But here you get to episode 4 and you think, okay, we've done X, Y, and Z. Could we wrap it up here? And actually you couldn't. You definitely need 5 episodes to wrap it up, and even then it would feel slightly rushed. So I think that 6-part length is justified here, and I do appreciate that, although when I was younger, a 6-part story just felt so epic. But it does create the kind of story you might not want to slip on regularly because of that length. You know, and do a lot of repeat views at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I agree. As a kid, 6-parters were a lot harder to sort of to work your way through. And as a kid, the fact that it's a 2-parter plus a 4-parter doesn't really land. As an adult, you get, oh yeah, there's a nice little 2-parter. Now we've got the 4-parter to break it all up. And Hinchcliffe does do that very, very well in his era. But as a kid, it's just 6 long parts. I agree that the opening is really well done and the time it takes is really good. And the effect of that is that by the time the Doctor arrives in Antarctica, we feel like we know Winlet and Moberly and Stevenson. They're real people and we're scared for them. And when the Doctor turns around and says, you're going to have to perform an amputation, and the guy's just terrified, like this is a real person.
Yeah.
When Stevenson is sort of realising that his ego, his vanity as a scientist, killed his mate and could wipe out humanity, it feels real. So I think that taking time to get to know those 3 in that closed environment is really, really effective. Taking the time to get to know Keeler and Scorby, and we'll talk more about them later, is really effective. And at the same time, it's funny you say the Doctor comes in late, because I was thinking, and I had a note here, that we don't go through all the sort of the usual later unit stuff of, Doctor, we need you to go and investigate this pod. I don't want to go and investigate this pod. This is boring. Doctor, it could be alien. Oh, hang on. And then, okay, well, I'll go and meet this person, and now I'll find out. It's just, he's in the office. He's already had that conversation, and he's like, oh, wow, photo. Okay, I need to get going there. And I think that although some viewers have said, oh, it starts like an episode of something else. The Doctor's just on missions now. I think, well, no. We've seen this before. We've just cut off that boring bit at the front.
I wonder where the helicopter came from. Wouldn't have come from Tasmania. It must have been on a ship or something.
I mean, at that stage, it could have come from Tasmania. It could have come from Tierra del Fuego.
Oh, okay.
Or it could have come from a ship. Because don't forget, Hobart is the capital city of the Australian Antarctic Territory.
That is true.
So, that's a really, really good point, yes.
Oh, where can we go next? I've got so many notes here, Dave. How about Dougie Bloody Camfield? I mean, you mentioned him earlier. I made a note on it. He is behind the lens, and sadly, it's the last time he ever does Doctor Who. Conversely, this is the last time before Dudley Simpson steps in for a long, long time. So one guy's sort of leaving and another guy is about to enter. That's kind of interesting, but by the by, I think Dougie's got to take some of the credit for this looking so good. I mean, the storyline and the locations do help. It's kind of hard to balls up some of that stuff, but when you're watching it and there's something gnawing at your brain along the lines of, this is really good 70s Who. Why is it so good? I think the secret herbs and spices in the background are Dougie Camfield.
I think that's absolutely right. I think the cuts he does are really good. I think the way that he frames a lot of shots is really good. So he makes the base in Antarctica seem small and claustrophobic. He makes the gardens seem terrifying, even when they're big and expansive. He makes the Krynoid look big and terrifying. He shoots in the dark. The night shots are really, really good. But he's also able to get the performances out of the characters. We'll talk more about the characters as we go on, I'm sure. But he gets the right performances. he makes sure that Scorby is a three-dimensional character. He makes sure that Keeler is a three-dimensional character. And there's just lots of really lovely bits going on. That when the Doctor works his way out of problems, he takes the time to sort of show us how it's going on. When people are scared, we get a moment to linger on them being scared. But even just a little detail. So when Scorby has taken the SLR rifle out of the cabinet, going, oh, look what they've got here. And I'm watching him and I'm going, because I know a bit about SLR rifles from my time in the cadets, I'm going, he's actually properly stripping that and taking out the firing pin. That's very good attention to detail. Well done. And that's got to be Douglas, absolutely.
Yeah, do you think Dougie showed him?
I wouldn't be shocked at all.
Yeah.
No, that's not how you do it. Here, right, clear, right, fine, open that firing pin. I thought, yeah, it's just that level of attention to detail is good, but although it's a long thing to watch as a kid, as an adult, it doesn't drag. I watched this in one session, bar a couple of breaks, to sort of go to the toilet and get a drink or whatever. I watched this in one session without blinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very watchable. Very watchable.
Something else that makes it very watchable is the wit. And it's not a story I really thought of as being particularly funny or witty, because let's face it, it is more than funny and witty. It is grim and dark and upsetting. So I'm not saying it is a funny story to story, but all the way through there is a wit and a black humour. Stuff like the comment at the end of everything, even your pension, is just a wonderful line, very well delivered. Tom gets to do his little moment out of duck soup where he picks up the phone, he's busy, and slams it back down again. The wonderful allusion to the importance of being earnest, a car boot, a Daimler car boot, the car is immaterial. They're sort of wonderful, and they're the sort of references that I can't imagine television, let alone Doctor Who, doing these days, of sort of going, let's just put in a duck soup reference, let's put in an Oscar Wilde reference, knowing that a lot of the audience at home will be going, oh, nicely played, I like that.
Well, the latter one in Australia wouldn't fly because we never called Markets car boots or anything, so people say, what's a car boot?
Yeah, no, so yeah, look, it's just really, really witty, and as I say, it's Tom at the height of his powers, where he's not doing the funny lines in a funny way. If anything, he's doing the funny lines in an angry way, and it's perfect.
Yeah, I like this era of Tom. There's still the silliness, and you would not mistake him for the previous three Doctors by any means. But as I think you were alluding to earlier, he's not out of control, Tom. It's this really good mix of a Doctor who doesn't act like a child but still has a sense of fun. He has the wickedly funny lines. If I could only have one version of Tom, it would be this version all day long.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not saying that he is angry all the way through, far from it. He's alien all the way through, which is fantastic. The line as he departs the World Ecology Bureau, don't touch pod, could be dangerous, is not played in a silly way, but it's alien and it's sort of light and it's a little bit fun, but you go, well, how serious is he? And then you get to where he is discovering what's going on and just, stuff like, you must help yourselves. Very underplayed. Very underplayed.
Yeah, and when he needs to be an action man, he's straight into it. It's my Return of the Jedi moment. On Jabba's sail barge, if I can go off on a tangent, when
sure.
Luke Skywalker bounces off the gangplank, lands on the skiff, grabs the lightsaber, ignites it, Boba Fett's like, I'm in, and just flies straight over to engage, right? He's straight in. And this has the scene where the Krynoid is going to touch Sarah, and the Doctor's like, nah, he's straight through the window, he's straight through the skylight, and crashing down. And that's my Boba Fett moment for Tom in this. It's like, wow, he's a man of action. This is fantastic.
He is a man of action. He does it really, really well, because at that point, all he's doing is saving Sarah. So, yep, goes for it. The moment when he beats up and punches out the chauffeur, there's that half a beat pause before he brings his fist down. And you go, yep, good. The Doctor's just going, do I have to knock him out? Yeah, I have to knock him out. Right, here I go. But it's not something he's reveling in or he's enjoying, which I think is the right balance to do. There's the stuff where he's angry at Scorby, and he does righteous anger, so it would make no difference. That's sort of wonderful sort of aggressive thing. But then when Scorby's beating him up and just, it's a really sort of, if you like a bit of action, it's a very well played scene. A bit unsteady on your feet, Doctor, and just sort of throwing him into the garbage cans. You're going, well, this is not a punch-on, because the Doctor wouldn't get into a fight. But the Doctor is being beaten up, and that's nasty. Yeah, it's the right balance.
Yeah, when he hits those garbage cans, I was looking and thinking, I think they're real garbage cans. I don't think they're like stunt garbage cans, like made of cardboard or something.
No, look, I don't know how they played it, but it is full on, and I like as a sad 40-something-year-old who does Doctor Who podcast. I like that it's serious. I like that it feels a bit adult. I didn't as a kid.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the character of Scorby then. He is interesting because he's the kind of character I don't think we would have seen 10 years earlier in Doctor Who or during those previous 10 years. I think as a mercenary, it's tying into maybe some of the African conflicts that were happening in the 70s, and mercenaries and soldiers of fortune were becoming a thing, and they were getting written into fiction and into TV shows, and that's kind of where the Scorby character comes from. He's just not like an East End thug. He is one of these mercenary types who people might be hearing about on the news at this time in the mid-70s.
Yeah, he's a brilliant character. He is actually very, very smart. He's very canny. He's very effective. It's only because he came up against the Doctor, who is even more smart and canny and effective, that he isn't completely successful in all of his missions. He's sympathetic is the wrong word, but he feels like a real character. He's gone, well, I've got some skills. I can make money using those skills, and who cares about morality? I'm a rich man now, and that's really effective. I think his death is really, really cool, and I like the sort of the slow unwinding of the character as he realises that he's probably not going to make it out, and that's really well played. It's really, really effective. I like the fact that he can make a Molotov cocktail on children's television. Yes, a Molotov cocktail. Sure, let me just show kids how to make a Molotov cocktail on screen. It's quite extraordinary, but it's really, really good. I'm aware that John Challis is a much bigger name in the UK, particularly for his role in Only Fools and Horses, which I don't remember ever being particularly big out here. He's not an actor I've sort of recognised from anything outside of Doctor Who.
No, me either, to be honest.
Let's keep going with the characters then, because I want to talk about Harrison Chase.
Please.
So, I had a couple of thoughts on Harrison Chase. One, he's a wonderful camp villain, but he's genuinely ruthless, genuinely terrifying, genuinely insane, and I think that's wonderful. I think there's a lot of nonsense talked about Harrison Chase, and again, to sort of talk about the evolution of my relationship with the character. As a kid, I was just indifferent to him. He was just a strange guy in a suit with a big tie that you didn't really understand. Then later on you go, oh, wow, he's completely insane and he's been taken over by the Crinoid, and that's really interesting. And then you read all this stuff in Doctor Who publications about, well, actually, he has he has a sexual relationship with the Crinoid. And you go, oh, wow, he does. That's profound. And now I watch and go, of course he doesn't. he's not sitting there sort of, getting off on the Crinoid. He's just completely nuts. And
Dave, he's going to be playing in his green cathedral.
Oh, no, that's nonsense. It's just, he's just been taken over by the monster because he's the baddie and he has to go a bit too lowly at the end of it. I think there is a lot of nonsense played in there. Look, I'm aware that the actor who played him was an openly gay man. He was, I think at the time this was being made, he was living with his partner for 15 years. So are people seeing that part of the actor and making assumptions possibly? I don't think it's there. And the second point before I let you weigh in on Chase, Rob, is I just was also thinking, although it's a great performance, I do think it is a little bit two-dimensional in terms of the character. And if you're doing this now, they've probably gone a little bit too far the other direction. If you're doing this now, he'd either be a foppish member of the aristocracy who's got too much money and too much power, or he would be the CEO of a company, like somebody out of the Alex Rider TV series and novels, all the way to, he's the good multinational CEO that's actually got some really dodgy stuff going on, and he's the one that funded saving the whales and saving the rainforest, but he's very dodgy behind the scenes. Like, there would be all that stuff going on that I think we don't see. That's not what we did in the 1970s. I'm relaxed about it. I was just sitting there watching it going, it would be fascinating to know a bit more about who this guy is.
Yeah. I find him an interesting baddie insofar as, yes, he's a bit bonkers, but it's never that overplayed. You think of when he's performing that symphony for his plants. If this was New Who, I think he'd be like, and now the symphony for my plants. Yeah. he'd probably have a cape. He'd probably flick the cape over his shoulders as he was saying it and gurn all the way through as he played so that it was, basically comedy. But here, although you might laugh at it, it's not being played for laughs. He is just a bit bonkers. Okay, he is bonkers. We have this guy doing bonkers stuff, but it's in such a straight way. You're sort of left guessing quite how mad he is. I find that interesting.
Yeah, and look, they certainly weave that through very nicely right from the start. The comment that he makes to Dunbar about bonsai, or torture of plants, you sort of go, well, that's an interesting perspective, but no. No. But I get where you're coming from, but no. So, that sort of stuff's really interesting. His stuff about recycling experiments and the sincerity is all very good, but contrasted with the fact he's happy to put a human being into his grinder. So look, it's really good. I did wonder if it went a little bit too far in the final episode where he's sort of doing all these animal feeds. I sort of thought, is that a little bit too much? I don't know. Look, I think it's great. He's very memorable. It's a wonderful performance. Are we analysing him too far? Probably. I don't think he's necessarily gay. I certainly don't think that he was jerking off to a crinoid. And, look, I know that made for a lot of very cerebral essays back in the 90s, but no, I don't think so.
Yeah, okay. How about Sarah? I don't think she gets to do a lot in this, but I still think it's a pretty good outing for her in terms of she's by the Doctor's side. She's not screaming. She's right in the fight. You don't leave this story thinking, gosh, I wouldn't want to be lugging her around the universe with me, Although she doesn't do anything overly brilliant, she's really solid and dependable for the Doctor, which for this era is absolutely the companion's role. It's very different today where the companion is basically the focal point, but here she's in that supporting role. I think she's really great at it.
This is Miss Smith, my best friend.
Yeah, is that the first time we hear the Doctor say that?
Oh, I think it could be.
It could be.
It could be, yes. No, look, she's wonderful. It isn't her story, but she gets a lot of good scenes. She's the one, when the Doctor is being alien in Antarctica, who has to turn to the scientists and go, no, this is what he's saying. This is what he means. Understand him. She sort of translates for the Doctor, which is really good. If you ever wanted examples of Liz Sladen, as she famously could, being brave and terrified at the same time, the cliffhanger to part 3... which is just, that's a wonderful cliffhanger. That is absolutely chilling. I must see what happens when the crinoid touches human flesh. And you see Sarah just utterly terrified, but not unbrave either. It's a wonderful performance. Her scene with Keeler, she sells the horror of that, as I was discussing. She gets to one-up Scorby. When he's the one who falls apart, she's the one that pulls it all together. Yeah, it's not her story, but I think she's got nothing to be ashamed of at all.
I remember the first time, maybe not the first time I saw this, but maybe the first time I can remember seeing this, her coming to his bedside where he's almost fully transformed, but he's still a bit human. And I thought, is this going to be like Robot, where she befriends the robot? Is she going to befriend the monster here?
Oh,
I was
right.
wondering if it was going to go in that area, but it doesn't, of course, because he transforms, and that's the end of that.
Yes, no, yeah, yes.
Story-wise, is it worth mentioning something that comes up in a lot of Doctor Who fan publications, so I think we're contractually obliged to mention this, the Man-Eater of Surrey Green episode of The Avengers, which went out a decade earlier. Let me read you and the listeners the blurb, Dave. A man-eating plant from outer space lands in Middle England and takes several top horticulturalists as prisoners in an effort to germinate the earth. If that doesn't sound at least 50% of Seeds of Doom, I don't know what does. Yeah,
look, I think the central conceit of both stories is obviously the same, and I'm not going to argue that's not the case. I think the execution is vastly different. I know this is the story that a lot of fans do compare to the Avengers. I actually don't think that's quite correct. Now, I will note that I'm not a massive fan of the Avengers. I enjoy the Avengers, but I haven't seen a lot of Avengers. I've really just mostly seen the Emma Peel seasons that were broadcast on repeat in Australia when I was in my teens.
And they would have been the colour ones, I imagine.
No, they broadcast the black and white and the colour ones.
Did they really? Okay.
Certainly I have seen the black and white ones. Maybe that was on video. But anyway, the point is, I've mainly seen Emma Peel. I haven't seen sort of like super early or super late Avengers. But I think as I watched this, there's a level of nastiness and violence that I couldn't quite imagine in the Avengers. The Avengers is all sort of, very sort of genteel staged fights with umbrellas,
It's pretty campy.
Yeah, and shooting things out of people's hands, and and the like. John Pertwee getting zapped by a laser gun. It's not punch-ons. It's not suffering. I don't think the tone of this is remotely like the Avengers. Those who are bigger fans of the Avengers, please, if you think it is tell me that I'm wrong. But I don't really buy it. I think the execution's quite different. I think the stakes are quite differently done. I think the villain's quite different. So, yeah, look, is it the same central conceit? Of course it is. Let's face it, most of the Hinchcliffe era has the same central conceit as something else.
Well, I was going to say there's an element of Day of the Triffids in here as well, but, that's okay. Brainer Morbius is doing Frankenstein, for example.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it can't be accused of riffing off the 1981 adaptation of Triffids because it hadn't been made yet. So
there you go.
Yeah, look, I think it does sort of riff on all that sort of stuff, and it's very good in that sort of sense. A character I just want to mention is Keeler.
Yes.
I think that for a long time I thought he was sort of the goody or the hapless individual, but you realise, even though there's a few times where he says, no, I'm not going along with this, he then gives in and goes along with it. There are a number of times when he could have just said, you know what, I'm leaving. What are you going to do, Mr. Chase? You get to shoot me? I'm retiring. I'm resigning. I'm gone. Goodbye. I'm not playing part of this anymore. And he doesn't. And so I don't think that, whilst he's not as wicked as Scorby or as Chase, he's not the goody either.
No, but that is an interesting kind of character. One where we sort of feel sympathy for him. We sort of think he might be in this direction, but he's not really in that direction, but he's also not a real baddie either. There's some ambiguity there that I think is really cool. I think it makes the characters more realistic. People in real life aren't always black and white.
No, absolutely. At the end of the day, he's not evil or wicked. He's just weak. And the thing that is always fascinating about those characters is that we all have that moment of, well, how strong or weak would we be? Would we walk away from our job and our livelihood just because it was all getting a little bit nasty? What would be our line? And so I think that does make it fascinating. So, yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Dave, you were talking earlier about how the Mulcher scene could have been Benton, and we talked a bit about Unit, but I just want to mention, because I made a note about it, we don't get the Unit family here. We get Unit, but it's no one we recognise, and it's the last time we see them until the Five Doctors. That's only a cameo. It'll be about, I think, 14 years until we see them actually in action again, firing guns and jumping around in Sylvester's final season. That's quite a long break between drinks. Yeah,
I like it when the Doctor interacts with civilization in this sort of way. I like his interactions with the World Ecology Bureau. I think they're really, really good. I think that the use of Unit is very natural. I like the scene where he has to convince them that the Crinoid is actually controlling plants and this is serious. I think as a kid the laser gun scene was something that I really enjoyed. So look, would it be nice if the Brigadier was there? Sure. I must admit I don't really miss him. Nicholas Courtney apparently was on a tour on the stage at that stage, so be it. I think it's fine. I like the spectacle of the RAF being called in to blow it up. And let's be honest, that's what would happen. You would say, okay, let's get the RAF to come and blow this thing up. Is it a weak ending? Look, maybe, but for me, the tension leading up to the Doctor almost being mulched is kind of the big dramatic thing. And then the tension of can they escape through the trees and all the rest of it, I think is big enough build up, and then there's a big explosion. It's probably the only way you could do it. The Doctor isn't going to talk the Crinoid down, let's face it. So it all works for me.
Do you think it's intentional that there is a line in there about guns and bombs, I think not always being the answer, but in the end the answer is a bunch of missiles from the RAF? It's something that made me sort of chuckle afterwards.
Yeah, I think it is. And it is that cheat about, Sylvester McCoy says, my Doctor doesn't use guns. She can use a gun, but my Doctor doesn't. And I think it's that thing of, the Doctor wouldn't blow somebody up. The RAF can blow a Crinoid up. Scorby can make a Molotov cocktail. I'm not going to do it. That's an important line. And that would bring me to my final thought, but I've got one more dot point to talk about first, Rob.
Yes.
And that is, we mentioned it in passing, but let's actually mention it again properly. Jeffrey Burgeon's music. A wonderful composer. He did Brideshead Revisited. He did The Chronicles of Narnia, which are two things that stand out in my memory, and a number of many other things as well. I had the CD of his work back when I was younger. He only does this in The Terror of the Zygons. It is a welcome change from Dudley Simpson. I love Dudley Simpson, but I love the fact that we mix it up. I've always said one of the problems with modern Doctor Who is that they have the same house style every single time. I like it when they have different composers coming in with different spins on the show. I think that's really good. It's what J&T gets right in the early part of his time. It's what they get right here. And yeah, just the flutes and the woodwind to convey that woody sort of plant-like environment and that ethereal quality in Antarctica is just perfectly done. And it's just yet another thing where everything has gone right, including the music, to just make this both excellent but unique, which brings me to a 5 point. Can I keep going with that thought to sum up, Rob?
Keep rolling, Dave.
I'll keep rolling. So look, could Doctor Who be like this every single week? The answer's no, and that's a good thing. I said at the start that this is a story that is easy to put at the top of the list because it stands out as being different. It is a slightly nastier tone than Doctor Who would normally get. It is produced in a way that is slightly different again. And straying from the house style is a really important thing. There are other stories that stray from the house style and are a disaster. Mm-hmm. This strays from the house style and it all works. I don't think Doctor Who could be like this every time, but this is Doctor Who for grown-ups. I think we've demonstrated by saying we bloody love this as adults, and we didn't bloody love it as kids. And I think that demonstrates that it is a story that is perfect for us as fans in our age group. It lets us pretend that we're not watching a kid show. It lets us sort of get down and have a bit of nastiness. It lets Tom be Tom. It's full on, it's well made, everything comes together, but it couldn't always be like this. It is a different story.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of Doctor Who, isn't it, in a nutshell? It does end on a clanger though, Dave, which has always bothered me. They're back in Antarctica, and the reason given is the TARDIS hasn't been reset from where it last went, but they never took the TARDIS there in the first place. And it's like, wow, why did you drop the ball right at the end? Why?
I'm going to disagree.
Are you?
And say that one of the things I do remember enjoying when I was a kid was the light-hearted ending. And I remember my dad and I turning to each other and having a little chuckle at the sort of the fun ending that was there when it was broadcast. And we weren't sitting there going, hang on, that makes no sense, which we do now. So I think that on broadcast that was a perfectly fine ending. And I think it also was perhaps a necessary ending because it's been so horrific. You don't want to walk out going, oh God, I just want to go and kill myself now. You know, you want to walk out going, oh, well, that was another fun, jolly jape of an adventure. We'll be back for another adventure of Doctor Who next week, or actually a couple of months' time, given it was the season finale. At least in Australia, we just kept playing it again and again. I think it's necessary, but yes, it is a clanger. I get that. It doesn't hold up.
Okay, so you were like, oh, Sarah's in her swimmers. She's not getting hypothermia.
Yeah. Oh, look, she's in her swimmers. They've gone to the wrong place. They've made a funny gag at the end. Oh, classic Tom Baker, classic Fourth Doctor. Isn't this fun? Yeah, I'll tune in next week. I don't mind that I've been scared witless all through it. No, it'll be fine next week.
So, Dave, in summary, I can't say that this is a forgotten gem or it's a diamond in the rough or any of those other things I might say sometimes, because I think the story is quite well regarded. It might get forgotten a little, but only a little, as there's some pretty big name stories around it. And there's more to come in the season ahead. And as a six-parter, as I alluded earlier, maybe people don't put this on as often for comfort viewing, but I'm really clutching at straws. I think people know this one, they know it's good, and it doesn't need rediscovery or reevaluation or anything like it. So for a score, it's easily 8 out of 10, maybe 8.5 out of 10 for me, and I may even still be slightly underselling it.
Look, that's all very fair and reasonable. Something I've said a number of times over the last decade, Rob, is one thing that we sometimes neglect to do as Doctor Who fans is go back and watch the classics, go back and watch the favourites. We watch the ones we haven't seen for a while, or the ones we think maybe it deserves a reevaluation, or we watch the ones that are comfortable to watch, but it's sometimes something we forget to do. Just go on and put on a proper die-hard classic. And I think this is a proper Die Hard classic. There is nothing I would change about it unless we're getting down to the level, maybe the polystyrene snow could have been a bit better. I mean, we haven't even mentioned Amelia Ducar, for goodness sake. There's so much good in this. There's nothing I would change. It's an A+ for me. And I think if you're a long-term Doctor Who fan who occasionally is not quite sure where you and the series are going in your relationship, do yourself a favour and put on a stone cold classic that you love and remember why you enjoyed this show. Because when this show is well made, well acted, well written and well produced, as this undoubtedly is, this show is great and worthy of doing a podcast about.
Yeah, that's why we're here.
Why we're here.
Brilliant.